If there is one profession that gets you the most amount of money, unlimited growth, and a stunning lifestyle, it's sales. It's also the fastest ticket to the C suite. But let's be clear, it's not for everyone. Sales also has one of the highest burnout rates, with up to 35% turnover annually. Today on Cross That Bridge, we sit down with someone who's cracked the code. Raj Sharma spent over a decade at one of the world's top tech companies, rising from a rookie sales rep to a sales leader. Let's learn from his sales mantras, his philosophy of selling, and the mindset hacks that made him a salesman par excellence. Welcome, Raj, to Cross That Bridge.
Thank you.
Raj, there was a survey that said 46% of people do not choose sales as their choice of their career. How did you get into sales? Was that by design or by chance?
I think it happened by chance. I was definitely in that category of 46%. For me, it was more about, at the time, focusing on DJing. I used to DJ a lot, and I had a radio show after school. And a friend of mine got a job in real estate and told me that he could probably get me an entry-level job. And then I realized that I had to work Saturdays, which I didn't mind, but I got the opportunity to take Friday off, which meant that I can also work and still focus on DJing. Ultimately, I realized that it gave an opportunity to talk to people and learn to sell by accident.
So, what was your motivation when you joined the corporate sales?
That was a bit of a journey. I mean, I've had a number of different customer service and sales type of roles. And then ultimately, over the last 20 years, I've had very different experiences across different levels of corporate sales. After real estate, I went into telco sales and actually did door-to-door knocking, which I don't know if that still happens today. That was quite interesting and challenging, trying to knock on strangers' doors and trying to sell them telephone lines and mobile phone plans and
What were you
internet.
selling? Optus or Telstra?
At the time, it was Optus. And then ultimately after that, I did real estate for a couple of years, again into sales. I was first putting up signs, and I went back and did selling, which was quite interesting because I realized quite quickly I was dealing with people's biggest assets, asking them to trust me as a young adult with their biggest asset, their home, to sell and represent. After real estate for a while, I ended up in again in telecommunications, where I went to what I call the boiler room. If anyone's seen that movie, I highly recommend it. It was 100 people on the floor, making 50 calls, 2.5 hour talk time KPIs, trying to sell cheaper phone rates and consolidated telephone plans, which was an interesting experience. After that, a friend of mine that worked with me briefly got me an interview at a large security vendor, and the rest is quite history.
Gotcha. So, your first role in corporate sales and security industry was through a reference.
Yes, it was actually the person that I worked with for about 2 weeks when I first joined the call center. He caught up for a drink almost a year later and said, "Hey, we're looking for an inside salesperson. Would you be interested?" I'd never, interestingly, no pun intended, crossed the bridge. I've never gone from the city to North Sydney, and went and got the interview for the first time on a train to North Sydney, and was referred to them. I was quite cheeky, managed to get the job, and stayed there for almost a decade.
Nice, wonderful. There's a lot of debate going on about sales being an art or a science. But I think this is also a mindset game. It's a big mindset. Sales is all about mindset as well. What's your definition of sales? Do you see this as an art or a science? And how did you navigate the mindset part as well?
I think there's a place for both, and it's well put. It's either an art or a science. I think the mindset is something that comes through experiences, which is an art on how you become a sales professional. How you're successful in executing a plan requires the science. So, there's numbers that are involved, but I always say it's the science behind the numbers that allows you to be planning and be effective in being successful consistently.
On that note, what according to you separates a successful salesperson from not so successful salesperson?
I think depending on the experience of the individual and the stage of where they are in their career, it will be interesting to look at what is a successful salesperson. So I think we can't brush everyone with the same brush. I think it needs to be considered around their experience and in which level they're operating. So being successful early in career is very different to being successful in someone that has a decade of experience and the roles and responsibility of that individual. But there are patterns and there are individuals that start early in career and become very successful throughout their career. And that's something that I feel is something that they're born with or they build internally. It's something that is not typically that's taught. They can read books and they can be coached. However, the execution of that mindset is quite natural to certain individuals. It's not to say that people can't work harder to fill the gap and then build new habits to become successful. So the important question is, how do we measure the success for the individual? And that needs to be very parallel to their experience and the roles and responsibility.
So, according to you, what success looks when you are, let's say, early in your career, vis-a-vis when you are a little bit late in your career?
For me, when I have the privilege of working with individuals that are early in career, the ones that show a lot of potential are the ones that are coachable, those that remain humble, those that don't come with this attitude that they have past experiences in different roles. I tend to say that you might have done really well playing tennis, but you're now playing basketball. And in basketball, you need to pass the ball and you need to play in a team. So I think it's important that you need to get runs on the board before the ego kicks in on your past success versus the current sport you're playing.
So, do you believe top performers have higher ego?
I think top performers will naturally have higher ego. It's an important element that allows them to be consistent in being successful. I think that ego needs to be regulated in front of others. I think the ego can help to drive self motivation versus coming across egoistic will typically be counterproductive to your audience.
So, how would you define Raj Sharma when you started as a career? How were you, and how has the transition been over the last few years for you?
I think my last answer is something that just came naturally, but it's my 20 plus years of self reflection and experience that said I was absolutely naturally uh, egoistic as a alpha male sales individual, and through good friends and good role models and good coaches, you realize that that ego needs to be in check. So of course, you like to have flashy things and come across like a bit of a hero in the office when you're doing well in sales, and then time to time you need to be humbled to realize that it's a marathon and not a race when it comes to a sales career.
How would you draw parallels with marathon and sales?
It's a deep question because it depends on who you're talking to and under which situation. But one of the narratives that I have from time to time with individuals is, do you want to have a great month? Do you want to have a great quarter? Do you want to have a great year? Or do you want to build a great career? And I think that is going to be independent on the individual's most biggest priority at the time. Every deal matters, every month matters, every quarter matters. However, through experience and regulation, you realize that if you feel you've done everything right, then you deserve the deal. And sometimes things don't go your way, but you can't let that loss define you or define your career. So it's something you need to think about, that you need those humbling moments to continue to build that tenacity.
Gotcha. Well, salespeople are usually very passionate people, right? And when a loss happens, yes, when you win, you obviously you're over the moon. But when things go south, when you have a loss, it takes people a lot longer to recover from that loss. How do you come off the setback?
I think you need to definitely lean on people that you trust, and there's always going to be someone else that's experienced the similar emotion through losses. They're hard, and they're still hard when you have losses, especially when you work so hard on a deal for a month or 6 months or 12 months or even longer. What comes with experience is having the opportunity to reflect on what you could have done differently, if there are any lessons learned, because that's going to prepare you for the next win. They're not easy though, because every deal matters, and it can make or break a year, and can make or break a career. However, I think you need to look at the longer term view of who you want to be in the next 12 months and the next 3 years and 5 years. And ultimately, are you still learning and growing through the experience, through the win or the loss?
So when you look from the lens of 3 years or 5 years career plan, how do you plan your, let's say, career when you start a new job in a new company?
Again, I think it depends on the individual's experience. Are they early in career? Are they new to sales? Have they shifted from a different industry? It's quite interesting. More recently, I've had a lot of random people approach me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, we want to join sales." And I'm always happy to talk to people and just share my personal experience or my personal view on what it is to be in sales and why they want to get into sales and what are their motivations to get into sales. But depending on their career, I think they need to think about what is it they want to achieve by being in sales. Of course, money is a motivator for most salespeople, and I think it should be because I think it's a high risk, high return environment from time, and also a lot of the emotional intelligence that comes with building the art of sales. However, a lot of individuals also come in and are chasing a title, and I think that's something that they need to think about. What is it they're looking for in the sales career versus they feel that getting a bigger title will mean that they may have the opportunity to earn more money or they might have more freedom. And I think a lot of that is something they need to really think about through a coach or people that they can trust or people that have gone through the experience. Because many times they realize they're probably in the best position where they are now, or they might be looking at things differently, or they need to consider their path differently as to where they will be most happy and satisfied in the role that they do.
So what would be your top three suggestions to someone who's making into sales now in 2025?
If someone's new in sales, I think it's really important that they come with a few qualities that are important. When I'm interviewing them, for example, absolutely someone that's got experience and can share that experience and examples of where they've been coachable. I think it's something that they need to be very open with. One thing I learned in my career is no matter how good you may be, you're as good as your last quarter. So you need to remain humble, and building a thick skin takes time. When you think you're untouchable or you're great, I think you need honest and close friends or peers or coaches that can bring some humility back in to really yourself to realize that it's a long term journey.
So when you're starting a career, there are a lot of negative self beliefs you carry. Obviously, you're not experienced. Like, for example, imposter syndrome, fear of rejection, fear of being pushy. How did you tackle any of those when you started your career in sales, and how did you overcome that?
Absolutely. I think even now, I probably get some of those emotions from time to time, depending on the scenario. But again, I think what's most important is you need to remain very authentic. When you think about imposter syndrome, that is something that is probably more of self reflection on, do you feel you deserve the position you're in? Do you feel that, did you fluke it or was it by chance? Or do you really deserve it? And that's something that takes time and development through, again, through coaching or through therapy or through having a deep and meaningful conversation with a close friend or your partner to feel like you're enough. And I think that comes through a lot of life experiences. On that point, I mean, I remember when I felt that way midway through my sales career as an enterprise seller, and I would go and speak to C-level executives, and I'd feel very nervous, and I'd feel very um, not deserving of that conversation. That shifted for me overnight when I had my first child, and then I realized that this job and this career is not about me; it's about developing a family and taking care of my family. So that level of confidence happened very quickly where I didn't feel that way. And I was very comfortable talking to other individuals and confident that the job that I was doing was to the best of my ability with the right intentions. And that resulted in great success because then I was very comfortable just being who I am and wore my heart on my sleeve. And I got really good feedback on being myself. I think it's actually a lot harder mentally and emotionally and physically. It's tiring trying to be something and trying to be someone that you're not. And I think a lot of people can pick up on that very quickly. So I think that's something that comes through time and experience, and something that you can't read a book on, and you just need to go through that yourself to develop. And I think that's the beautiful thing about a sales career, on how you learn EQ more than just the IQ of the most amount of product knowledge or the most amount of industry knowledge. Again, very important. But I think the art of selling is definitely a contact sport with people.
You briefly mentioned two words here. One was stress and therapy. So tell me a little bit more about. Did you get overwhelmed when you started your career with all that stress that comes with sales career? It is very stressful for someone who comes from outside, is not a part of this sales culture, to be going on those sales calls, committing a number, or failing to deliver a number, and what you get to hear, and you can any minute be asked to leave because of your performance. So how did you navigate through this high pressure environment?
It is a high pressure environment. And as I mentioned earlier, you're as good as your last quarter. So, you can go from hero to zero very quickly after 90 days. I work better under pressure. And that might sound odd, but I tend to be at my best when I work under pressure. I find it very frustrating when I'm on top of things. So I will create work for myself and really try to get engaged, try to find a way to help others. And and of course, continuous development and self-improvement is very important. That's not for everyone. Some people hate the idea of that consistent review and uh, you know check-ins and account plans and medics and everything else that comes with sales. And again, only through time and experience, you need to change your mindset that it's not there to add more pressure. It's actually there to help you, because there are people around you that actually want the best for you and are there to be successful. And I think now in enterprise sales, individuals that are stressing out more than they used to in the past are those that are trying to carry that burden alone. And what I encourage is, you can't be successful alone. And in a good environment, you shouldn't fail alone either. So I think that is something that people need to be more open and vulnerable to say, I'm not good at this. I need help with this. Who else is really strong at this? And what they'll find is that people love helping people. It's a natural human part of being that people feel really good when they help others. And I think that is something that we can do more of
And,
for good
and
reason.
how do you let go of fear of being judged in a hyper competitive environment, where if you become vulnerable, you may be seen as weak? How do you overcome that mindset? Not everyone's as from a leadership perspective, not everyone's as open to receive or coach people.
Yeah. It's interesting because more recently, I tend to come up with a self narrative that I like to share with people. And I realize that there is a duty and there's an obligation on being a leader or being seen as someone senior or more experienced, that you just have things under control and things are right. I realized more recently that my biggest strength is me being vulnerable, because the more vulnerable I became, the more open I became, the more connected I became with the individuals that I shared those experiences with. And it helped me, and it also helped the individual to say, we can do this together. We're fighting similar challenges or different challenges, but everyone's fighting a challenge. And I think that is something that is a great opportunity for us all to embed into the culture of how we work and the teams that we build.
So you briefly mentioned that when you're on top of things, you get very anxious or you get frustrated. So tell me more about that. Why people want to be on top of everything? Why does it make you frustrated?
It's just a habit that I've built, I guess. I tend to work better when I have a lot of things on the go. I tend to work better, especially when people are counting on me, because I don't want to let them down. It's probably just a bad habit where I'm not enjoying having my head above water for a while, because I'm always worried about when the next big wave is coming. So it's something that I'm learning to appreciate more as I as I get wiser, I guess, and older.
So you're driven by challenge, basically.
I love challenge. I love challenge. I love to help others solve their challenges through experience. And I think we're all facing different challenges in our personal life that affect our work life, and our work life that sometimes impacts our personal life.
So how do you balance personal life and work life? In sales, there's massive overlap. You carry your sales quota home as well, and then you're required to work or work on proposals in the night as well. Next morning, you show up with the mindset as nothing happened. You can have a worse day at home, still show up like expected to be giving you 100%. How do you navigate through that?
I made a lot of mistakes, like most people will. When you take work home and it creates tension with you and your partner or you and your kids, you will realize eventually that it's not fair on them and they didn't do this to you. So I'm very blessed with very supportive kids, and particularly my wife, that knows that this career and this job will come with that level of pressure. I had to learn how to regulate that. I had to learn how to leave that at the front door because they're facing their own challenges and they're facing their own world at school and at home and other things that happen in real life that are more important than a bad sales call or a bad account plan or a deal that we've lost, because it's part of the journey. Similarly, it's the same principle that I have developed when I get to work, because
Yeah.
sometimes life can take priority. And when you go to work, I was very conscious on being as consistent as possible. And I felt that it's my duty and my obligation that when I get to my floor and the lifts open and the door opens, that I need to be ready to be at my best. And that is a skill that I consciously worked on. And I encourage others to think about as well, because some people love the idea of coming to work to escape from life. And that's okay, because I think if you're privileged enough to have a job that you love or in an environment that you feel comfortable in and it can take you away from some of the pressures in life, then that's okay. Um, and it's a privilege to be in that position. It's worse when life takes over and you don't enjoy your job, then you need to probably seek a close friend or perhaps external help. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I definitely encourage that. But when you come to work and you're dealing with life, I think it's very important that it's your obligation then to perform at the best as you can when you're at work. What I'm less tolerable about is it's disrespectful and unfair if, because you have things happening in life, that you're not going to perform at your best while you're at work. I think you then need to take a step back and respect those around you and respect the business and your peers and your leadership, that you need time off to reset and rebuild your confidence and your mindset to balance out life and work.
So where does empathy fits in here?
I think empathy is the most important when it comes to dealing with people and your obligation as a leader. I think you need to be more curious when individuals are dealing with things or acting differently. And you need to have a very open mind when you have a conversation. It's the only way you can build trust for them to open up and actually tell you what's happening in their life as to why they may be acting differently. And that comes down with being consistent and also being vulnerable, because then you can share and say, I totally understand, I can relate, or I'm dealing with my own challenges. And I think that's a great thing if you work in an environment or you have colleagues and leadership that you can open up with just to be human, because ultimately it's, one small part of your life. It shouldn't be all your life. And I think people tend to forget that.
Yeah. So you spoke briefly about different leadership situations in your career, right? Where you had to coach a few individuals. What has shifted when you were an individual contributor to a sales leader now as individual for you?
A lot's shifted and a lot's changed. It's because I made a lot of mistakes. I went from being a sales rep to being a leader. And what tends to happen from 9 times out of 10, I guess, is the salesperson that becomes a sales leader ends up doing the work for the sales team. It takes a lot of time to build an environment where you can trust the team to do their best work. And also, you being comfortable that they're not going to do it the way you would do it. And in fact, sometimes you realize that they do it a lot more efficiently or a lot more effectively than the way you do it. And I think that collaboration between the sales leader and the rep is a great thing, which also builds a lot of trust because then you can play to their strengths and they come to you when they feel like you can add value to them.
So how do you let go of the control? Typically, when you graduate from being an individual contributor to a sales leader, and when you're especially when you're performing very well at being an individual contributor, you are a control freak, right? And how do you let go of that control when you become a leader? Because they're two different skill set: being a sales rep versus being a leader. And there's a cliche saying that never promote your best sales guy into a leadership position.
It comes down to the individual because a lot of people talk to me about wanting to be a sales leader. And I probably at times have talked them out of it because I made them realize why exactly do you want to be a leader? And I think that conversation is very important as to why they want to move from being an individual contributor, especially if they're a great performer, to becoming a sales leader. Being a sales leader and being an effective or a meaningful sales leader is someone that will do it through a lot of empathy and come to the realization that if you want to have a career in being a sales leader, you need to be okay with it being a thankless task, I would say. Um, and more importantly, to be a respectable sales leader, you need to be okay with understanding that part of the job is to let go. And I've had the privilege of having amazing sales leaders, and I've learned from some of the best in the industry. I'm very grateful for them. And they'll always tell you about their experience and journey. But it's when they lead through that example of letting go. They have to let me do my job effectively, and they need to be comfortable if I make a mistake. But they have every right then to, help educate me on where I made that mistake. And that's their obligation on me to improve and to do better next time. And that is, again, part of the journey. It can't just be a deal or a month or a quarter. It needs to be part of that engagement as you're building that relationship over a number of years with the individual.
So how long typically you think it takes for an individual contributor to become a sales leader? How many quarters, years, decades?
That's not a simple question. I mean, I see people that I interview early in career, and I'm fortunate enough. I feel I have, I guess, a sixth sense, and it's not just me because other people validate it. We'll interview people that are early in career, and they're a natural born leader. They're going to develop a strong career working with us, or anywhere they go, they're going to be successful. So I think that is sometimes just gift of the gap where they're born with that. And then you have other individuals that come in that have those qualities of being coachable and being humble and accelerate very quickly because they're doing all the basics right and they're great collaborators and they're very, you know, humble in the way that they engage. And I think sharing success in what they have shows qualities of someone that will become a very strong leader.
Right. And when you're hiring, what are the green flags and red flags do you see in people?
Great salespeople that interview and talk a little bit too much about their past success is important because we want to hear about examples of where you've done well. But then you can see the ones that take it too far and almost comes across a little bit bragging because then they'll talk about why they did it better than their peers or why they did it better than the way they were taught by the system that they were working under. And I think they cross a line of being uh, proud of their success versus that ego comes in. And I think that is something that is important because sometimes certain organizations need a really strong salesperson that comes in and will just break down doors and will be an individual contributor. But I think depending on the culture you're building and the team dynamics in which that individual will come into, I'm very conscious of making sure that I would rather hire someone that I see a lot of potential in than someone that comes in with a set mindset and is not going to be coachable and will probably disrupt and perhaps break what we've been building for a number of years. So I think it's also my obligation to make sure that we continually to build in the right direction.
What kind of personalities do you admire at the time of hiring? The ones who are very strategic, very planned, versus the ones who are a bit more on the go, and very entrepreneurial. Who do you think do better in sales?
I think it also comes down to the environment, the maturity of the business, and the role that you're hiring for. And I think I've loved the fact of how many people I've interviewed over the last few years and the skill that you develop unknowingly on being able to read the qualities of the individual other than what you read on their resume. And this is why it's very important that you hire the individual for what they can become than what they've done in the past. Because you want to bring someone on board that has the right qualities that can become someone better, someone stronger as they build their career in the team that they work in, versus someone that comes in that's really effective in the job that they're doing and what you're hiring them to do, but will not be challenged and probably not build a career and have a retention issue. So again, I think it depends on why you're hiring the individual for what role and what qualities they bring in. And both and all of those qualities are very important for salespeople to have that drive and have the motivation. And sometimes individuals that are very strategic, but need to have examples of where they've delivered on the strategic plan and how they've collaborated with others to be able to do that again, I think is also very important. So it's incumbent on the hiring manager and the leaders of the business that bringing on new people is, can we make this individual successful? Because there's a lot of people that could do the job well, but sometimes it's not the right fit for them and they don't realize that why, but it's a blessing in disguise. Because the last thing you want to do is bring on someone that could do the job well short term, but will probably be frustrated and not challenged and therefore not lose motivation.
Gotcha. And how do you approach coaching and development for different reps at a different level of performance?
I've got the privilege of working with some amazing professionals in our business. And in my teams, I've worked with, I would say, salespeople that are far more better than me in many areas. And as a leader, at one point, I found it quite daunting on how I'm going to go and add value to an individual that has more experience, more success in certain areas, and different skill sets. And that only changed because I remained consistent and showed vulnerability to where I developed. And I guess led from the front on where I would go and do the hard work for them. So as you build that trust, you get a little bit closer. And only through that, you can then have honest conversations on them getting to self reflect and talk about areas that they want to develop. That approach worked for me as opposed to leading with the mindset of, because I'm the leader, I want to enforce these changes. So I think strong, mature, experienced individuals will always want to be coached, but they want to be coached with someone that adds value and someone that can add skill through experience. And I guess fortunately for me, I've had a great career where I've seen success and seen some losses. And I think sharing those experiences allows me to build that level of trust with individuals and hopefully add value to the decisions they make on how they want to approach things moving forward. What I tend to say is, it's your business, it's your account, it's, it's up to you and how you want to make the decision. And the best thing for me is actually to be wrong about what I'm saying if we're disagreeing on something. But if you make a mistake, it doesn't make me right. It just means that maybe next time, because of my experience, you may consider my input. And I think that humble approach took me time to figure out is how I'm going to get that message across. And I think that is another element, which is our intent is always try to help the individual. But if you don't communicate that properly, then it's going to come across perhaps condescending and more competitive than really what you intend to do. So I think that is also very important for a leader to figure out, how am I going to connect with that individual in my team? Because that was important to me. I remember very early in my career, again, a great manager, but I remember that manager had a very blanket approach on the way that they approached the team. And I felt, again, early in career, a big ego that I deserved to be treated differently. And while I perhaps did deserve to be treated differently. It's how I approached it with the manager, with a very authentic and honest conversation, and said, I feel like um, it's unfair that we're getting the same amount of pressure when perhaps I'm doing a better job in certain areas. Even now, I have to be very considered, and when I sit in a room and I talk to my team, I have to be very clear on where it's a broad room, a broad conversation that is general, that everyone needs to improve on, versus that is quite individual. When it becomes quite individual, I think it's also very important that you plan for those discussions and you do that separately and not in front of the team. Because again, through my experience, I realize that I still remember the day where we had a team call, and my leader at the time uh, had constructive feedback for me. And I remember getting off that call and calling the leader right after the call and said, that should be the last time and the first time that you make me feel that way in front of the team. Because again, I felt like I was doing a good job, but everyone has areas of improvement. So I think that experience and the path that I took, I then said I should take that experience into the way that I lead people, because they're probably thinking the same thing. And some feel comfortable approaching me with that, versus how am I going to be the best leader I can be for them based on the leader that I wanted for myself.
No, that's great. So you invest in a person for their growth, right? So that they can build on their learnings and they can be a part of the culture.
Mhm.
When do you decide that person is not right fit for the business, and how do you get rid of those people? Like I read somewhere they say hire slow, fire fast.
That's harsh. People have lives, people have families, and people, I believe, have the right intent. Maybe it's a weakness, but I always tend to see the best in people. However, in business, it's not personal. It shouldn't be personal. And I think through experience, I got better at having uncomfortable conversations with individuals that are perhaps not performing. It's more interesting when you have individuals that perform really well a year ago or 2 years ago, but now are struggling. And that then it needs to be considered, is it because of their personal life taking effect into their business? Or is it that the business has changed and they're not comfortable with the change? And I think that is also a conversation that needs to happen consistently, because in my experience, I've spent close to a decade and now over a decade uh, working for the same employer. What I'm very comfortable is with change, and change gives growth. You need to have a growth mindset, but it's okay to also be honest. I've got some great people that have taught me great lessons. I remember an individual a few years ago that said, I'm not comfortable with the change. I don't want to work in an environment where we're selling more than one thing. And I really appreciated that, because they were very clear on what they like and what they don't like. And they went on to building a great career on what they wanted to focus on, versus an environment that consistently change. And that is a conversation that I started to share my experience, saying, I'm dealing with a lot of change, so I know how you feel. We need to be comfortable with this change. And ultimately, it's a decision. Do we want to come back on Monday and sit in this room and start all over again for the week ahead? Um, and I think that made people realize and start to approach me and say, I need help in these areas, or actually, I'm not comfortable with this change. And then you have a very thoughtful and important conversation to say, okay, well, can we put you in a position where you can be successful where you are within the business? Or we need to have a conversation about, are you going to be more happy and more comfortable and more successful externally? Uh, and that takes a lot of trust and a lot of time and a lot of experience to be able to have that conversation. What's difficult is that fight or flight mode where people don't like the change and they fear what's external, but also understand that they're going to continue to get pressure, because then there's a formal process and other things that take into effect, which affects their ego, makes them feel less important. And again, my obligation and responsibility for that individual is, I'm looking for a way to bring the best out and always to find a way to be successful, because your success is mine. I can say that, but they don't have to believe me. But only my experience and my past success is something that I can now rely on to say, here's an experience of where I've done that well, or here's an experience with an individual, or you should go and speak to that individual that's gone through a similar conversation or a similar process and now is in a better position. I'm privileged that I can even refer to that. But certain environments are not as considerate and patient, and that's okay. And it's difficult. So, what's more important is that does that individual come out with growth and a better mindset? And sometimes they're very thankful for that conversation. And I'm still talking to some of those individuals.
So, have you ever been humbled by one of your sales reps where you felt, yes, you were right, and he was obviously he needed to take your input, but it worked the other way around. He was probably you needed to be corrected there. As you have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a great friend that I even spoke to last night, where we worked together. He worked in my team, but understood that with the changes, it was something that it wasn't right thing for him. And he said to me, "I don't want that coming between us because I think we had mutual respect." And he's doing great in his career, and he's found a great place that he's being successful in, and I think he'll do well wherever he is. But at the time, what we needed for that role wasn't something that he was comfortable doing or being able to do. So I think that was a very privileged conversation where you're telling a person that you're better off leaving working where you are and looking externally, just because you're not going to be comfortable with the change and you're not going to be happy with the change. And I think life's too short to work in an environment where you're not happy. It's such a big part of your life.
Does that impact you as a person when those tough conversations happen? And how do you detach yourself from those conversations?
It becomes, I guess, very dependent on the relationship, very dependent on the other individual and their personal circumstances as well. And again, I'm not doing that as an attack on anyone else. It's my responsibility and an obligation to to who I'm working for to do the right thing, to help develop them, to help grow them, or to help them understand that they need to really work harder or on certain areas where they have gaps, or need to think about looking at alternative options to be successful. But yeah, I think it's something that I've been fortunate enough to have. But sometimes it's very difficult and it's very hard, and I do lose sleep at night because you're making a big impact to those individuals, families, and their life because of those situations. But I've learned that it's not a personal situation. It's just fortunately not the ideal part of our business life.
Yeah, I think I find that sales is a profession that humbles you more often than not,
Hmm.
and you learn a lot from your peers and your seniors
Yeah.
and the customers you deal with. No, not only the sales lesson but also life lessons.
Hmm.
Is there a book you have read over the last few years which has really changed the way you think or you lead both as a salesperson or as a leadership?
There's one book that comes to mind that I think really shaped who I am, and I've recommended it. And I don't like reading. I'm at best in maybe audiobooks on the way into work. There's a book called Learned Optimism that was recommended to me by a senior leader many years ago that happened by chance. And I read that book from uh, cover to end within a week just because I committed to getting it done on top of everything else that I was doing at the time. And I definitely recommend Learned Optimism.
Is there a quote or a proverb that you go back to when chips are down and you need to reset and ground yourself?
There's a lot of cliche ones that I guess come to mind, but one thing that perhaps I'm known for, or I say quite occasionally, is if you can see it, you can be it. And even my wife says that at home sometimes because I'm human and I feel pressure, and sometimes I'm not at my best, and that needs to be uh, reminded that if you can see the outcome and you can start with the end in mind, you know that it's possible. And if it's possible, then your challenge is and the opportunity is finding the path to that outcome. And that's the great thing about what we do and how we sell. And in leadership, half the selling's done inside, which means you have to have people that want to work with you, people that want to work with your team, people that want to make you successful, versus when you're dealing with customers and partners and ecosystems, you're selling your personal brand and as well as the company you're representing to be trusted because they have choice and they have a lot of people. And that is something that is the most exciting and the most challenging at times for individuals, which is dealing with that constant need to validate, constant challenge to establish new relationships. And even that got me thinking about the difference between a relationship and a contact. And I think that gets very diluted when individuals say, I don't want to impact my relationship with someone else because I'm going to make a call that's going to be uncomfortable. Like, hey, Gurpreet, I need you to get that order in by this week. So I'm now making my problem your problem. That's very hard if we haven't known each other for a long time, because I'm one of 300 people making that call at the end of the week, at the end of the month. But if you've got a relationship that's built through ups and downs, humility, and trust, then you might prioritize my call over the other 299. And I think that is the exciting bit about how many relationships can you build. And for me personally, it's about quality and not quantity, because even at an early age, I remember I loved my group of friends, and would get together and there's 10 of us, 15 of us, 30 of us. And I remember my father telling me very early on in age, and he said, a man is only lucky if he has one best friend. And I used to call everyone my best friend. And as life experiences come by, and as you get older, you realize that, yeah, I mean, I've gone from, 20, 30 acquaintances to 2 or 3 solid friends that I can call at any time of the day. And that is something that you need to be comfortable with business as well. You can't please everyone, and you can't be everything to everyone. But what you can do is connect with people and build meaningful, honest, authentic relationships that are not only due to because of business, but it's because of business that they were able to be developed. And then from there, I think it's important that we're talking to each other and that we're dealing not because of what I'm selling you today or what we're working on together today. One day I may take a different path, but I want you to deal with me because of who I am, not because who I represented at the time. That is a relationship versus someone that I can contact. It's not to say contacts are not important, because in sales career, I think the biggest thing that attracts a lot of employers is what contacts do you have that can get you up and running fast as possible.
No, perfect. Very well articulated, Raj. Now, this is a mentorship session where I'm going to ask you a few questions
Mhm.
about your tips and guidance to individuals who are starting their careers. Now, in 2025, what mindset do you believe someone should have to succeed in their first sales role?
This is quite interesting because I feel I'm one of the older generation. I feel like I'm the last of my kind of authentic selling and hard work and tenacity.
Sales
And
hero.
yeah, I love getting older. I've said this to you before as well. Like, I love getting older because you realize certain things that used to matter before are not as important when you get older and you put things in perspective. But with the new generation um, of people that want to join sales or feel like that they can do sales, it needs to be a balance, because at one time I was the new generation and I felt like I could do a better job than other people, and I just wanted the chance. And again, it goes back to, why do they want to do sales? And is there something in that individual that is natural, or have they got the aptitude to learn? So there's skill and will. Some people come with skill, but the will is not there because the ego is too high. They don't want to be humble. They don't want to be coached. And they haven't really got the experience or the examples of where they've done well, versus perhaps someone that is really passionate about sales, and that they'll put their heart and soul, but they're not a good fit for the role that they're interviewing for, or they're not a good fit for the environment that they're going into. And I think that's very difficult for early in career to understand, why am I not getting the chance to join? So they need to have a conversation about, if I was to get into sales, what is the best path for me to get into an environment? And sometimes it's not going to the largest corporation, because then you're going to be um, below average in comparison to the individuals that have 10, 20, 30 years experience in a large organization. you can still do what you love doing, which is to learn selling and engage with people and deliver results and work under a pressure environment. But perhaps you need to be a slightly bigger fish in a smaller pond than be a small fish in a
A
big
big
pond.
pond, yeah, yeah. I learned that very early in my life.
Mhm.
Exactly the same phrase was shared by one of my mentors.
Mhm.
That you better off be a big fish in a small pond because you get to learn a lot
Mhm.
from your peers vis-a-vis in a big company where you're just a small little, you have a small little vertical role, and that's all what you know about
Yeah, because
business.
unfortunately, they'll join an environment that they were hired into that is not going to make them have the best experience, and they're not going to love the art of what we're doing, and why we choose to do it for, for decades. And I think that experience into sales needs to be a positive one, so they feel that they have the potential to continually grow and develop to being a strong sales professional, if that's the career they want to take.
Sure. And what would you emphasize more on, product knowledge or people skills?
You've heard the saying, sales is a contact sport. It's a people sport. Personally, I feel it's more important on the EQ than the IQ. I think reading the room, knowing the art of less is more. Again, personal experience. I would go in early in career and felt that the more I talked, the more better I sounded, the more value I added, and overcompensated for my insecurities by saying more in a room. The idea of less is more is around selling is not telling. Selling is asking the right questions, leading the witness, and helping them buy. That is the art of selling.
Yeah, perfect. What's your advice on handling rejections, especially when it feels very personal at the start of your career?
Rejections are hard, but it's part of what we do, and they're very important to help us develop. I have interesting saying when I say we're not losing enough deals. My team would look at me and go, "What do you mean?" I said, "If we don't know why we're losing, we don't know how we're going to win." So I think the rejections are really important because I seek objections. Because that's the exciting thing about selling, which is if you give me an objection, I have the opportunity to respond. And I think it's that progress through objection handling that helps people build trust, helps you build relationships, and helps you get closer to the next yes.
Yeah. And you did mention about building a thick skin. How do you go about building a big thick skin?
A lot of soul searching. I gave you the example when we sat down more recently about me being humbled by a close friend and peer at the time. I would midway through my enterprise sales career, I was having a great year, and you know, I bought a flashy car, and we're driving back from a customer meeting, and I felt like I was awesome. But I remember my colleague at the time turned around and said to me, I didn't do a good job in that meeting. I presented terribly. I said too many ums and ahs in that meeting. And I remember while I was driving home, I squeezed my hands onto the steering wheel. But it's that moment that made me realize that this individual has my best interest at heart and is only telling me this not to break my confidence, but to actually develop it. That's when I switched. And then I realized that I have to seek feedback from people that are better than me in the areas that I want to develop. Too often, I see individuals that just seek feedback from everyone. And that to me is a little bit of a time waste for the individual trying to help and the individual asking for help. So I always encourage people, go and seek feedback to be humbled, but with people that have done what you're trying to do or have developed the skill that you're trying to develop rather than just everything to everyone. And the other really important part of my personal success is not been about the deal, is been the satisfaction on what's kept me in this uh, industry and in the sales profession is going back to that earlier point of helping people. I think a part of me gets really excited about sharing success. And the more you stay humble and coachable and thick skinned and sharing success, I think builds repeatable success.
So, how do you handle stress in sales? It's believed that sales is one of the 10 most difficult jobs out there today. How do you build that resilience?
People will say stress is good. It depends what type of stress. There is stress from the system, there is stress from the process, and there is stress that you create for yourself. I think that needs to be compartmentalized for the individual and needs to be something that is seen as a positive and not a negative. If you don't have stress and you don't have pressure, you can't move fast. So, again, you need to be comfortable in being vulnerable with a friend or a partner or a colleague or a leader to talk about those stresses in the right forum and in the right cadence, uh, and understand what type of pressure are you feeling and stress are you feeling. And is it stress that you're creating for yourself, anxiety, worrying about things that you can control, or worrying about things that you can't control? And that's a big one for me right now, which is as the world changes and environments change, and the only thing that's constant is change. So the only way that's helped me to deal with those changes and those stresses that come with those changes is what part of it can I influence and what part of it is out of my control. So that's one of the steps. The second part of stress is, you know, paying interest for money not owed, which is the anxiety bit of what happens if something bad happens. And that's on everyone. That's with everyone. And that's still something that I deal with every single day. And it's hard and it's not easy. And the only way I've been able to deal with that is to talk openly about it with a close friend or with my wife, to be open about this is really pulling me down and you need to work through that. Because I realize it's part of everyone's life. Everyone's going to deal with stress. Then there's stress that comes from the system and the business, which is I need you to have your forecast done. I need you to have your account plan done. I need you to have your strategy done. I need you to have other parts of cadence and spreadsheets and other things that are important but are not considered urgent, and you let it pile up. So you need to understand on how you manage that part of the roles and responsibility of what you do, because it's integral to continue to be better, and it's integral for you to be successful ahead. Goes back to my earlier point, which is you could have a great account strategy or a great opportunity plan and be really good in that deal, but then you're back to zero in 90 days. And this is why a lot of those stresses that come with what we do need to be managed and planned for of part of how we do what we do.
Gotcha. That was a wonderful answer, Raj. Thank you. I'm gonna finish this off with one of your examples you've seen in your life, which you found very funny in your sales career.
I thought about that earlier and nothing funny comes to mind. It was funny to me and perhaps funny to, to my peer, but perhaps it was at the time a little bit inappropriate or a little bit condescending to the individuals that were calling out in that particular scenario. So I won't share that. But it also made me realize that I'm a very serious person when it comes to the art of which I've had the privilege of being part of, and I still continue to develop and mature in. And that's because there's so many amazing people around me that help me become better. So for me, it's a very serious thing. I think I'm very grateful for what I do and very grateful for where I do it and very grateful for who I do it with and most importantly, who I do it for. And I think that's serious. So it doesn't mean you can't have fun. It may not be funny, but I do believe it's a very fun career. But it needs the right mindset and it needs the right approach to be able to stay in the marathon. It's a journey. It's not a destination. So therefore, I take every day very seriously, but I look for the opportunity to do something fun. I look for the opportunity to do something that makes me feel humbled or do something for someone else that may not have any personal benefit to me, but I felt like my experience or my vulnerability and that conversation helps that person have a good day ahead. I love that part of my job and the opportunity to do that. So it should be fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Raj. Thanks for this wonderful interview, and it was a pleasure to have you on Cross That Bridge.
Very grateful. Thank you for the opportunity.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.